just interested in prisoners' privileges and your position on that. And I think we all understand that we want to induce and give reasons for good behavior in the prison setting. And I think providing privileges is a good way to do that. Now, Matt and Sweat were two pretty bad guys. I think they were the worst of the worst. Should they have been on the honor block? And my perception is right now, I learned from my colleague to the right who's out there in Denimore, that primarily privileges are based on good behavior. Is there a need to change that from good behavior, but also taking into consideration people who have murdered law enforcement officials, driven over them back and forth, and killed their boss and dismembered them? Should there be more of a limit on those types of individuals, the worst of the worst? Because it seems to me these two guys illustrated good behavior just so they could get access to some of these privileges and help with their escape.
Well, that's a very good question. But I don't think it's black and white like that. And actually, black and white, that's an interesting choice of words that I just used. To get on honor block, you not only have to have a very good record, you have to have a good disciplinary record, meaning you didn't receive any misbehavior reports. So I think we need to examine who gets misbehavior reports in prison.
But they had a good disciplinary record.
Right, they did.
The purpose was to escape after they got access.
Right. So why did they have good records? I don't know.
Well, I think they wanted to escape, so they wanted access to those privileges.
Well, that could be, but if you look at the disciplinary records of and the conduct of most people that are in long-term, their behavior typically, I would say Matt and Sweat, are real outliers, and obviously since, we haven't had an escape in many, many years, they are outliers.
$20 million by those two outliers.
Right. But typically, people age out of criminal behavior, they mature, and they actually become better in prison. The worst thing we can do is to take away privileges and not work on reintegration, reentry issues, so when they do come home, we're safer than we would otherwise be.
Yeah,
so
my concept wasn't to take away privileges, but to limit them for the worst of the worst. I think all the inmates have to have a limit on privileges. You'll agree to that, right?
Well, obviously it's prison, right? So
right.
There are limits on privileges.
But don't you think there should be different limits for different measures, like the most violent of violent individuals maybe should have access to the commissary or to weightlifting or some of those things, but should they be isolated alone at times with a person like the seamstress there who, in closets or not oversight and things of that nature?
I don't think it's black and white, because I don't think that all the, quote, violent prisoners are the worst prisoners in the prison. I think it has to be an independent assessment. And actually, for the most part, that's how it's done within DOCS, because there's a number of things you have to do. I think it was a mistake that Matt and Sweat were on honor block, but the bottom line is there were, I think, 90 other people on honor block, and those 88 people were doing very, very well and have fabulous disciplinary records and actually bring something to the table in the prison in terms of, working in the tailor shop, being porters. The prison actually relies on
some of those
them.
Individuals dismembered their boss and ran over a law enforcement official several times?
I don't know the crimes of all those people, but...
Well, that's my point.
Right.
I'm talking about the most violent and seemingly most dangerous individuals, chronic, rapists, pedophiles.
Obviously that should be a factor.
Well, that's my point.
It should be a factor, but I don't think
it is a factor now. And I'm told, primarily by my colleague here, that those who have oversight are not really told what the crimes are of the people they have oversight in the prisons. I mean, they find out because the prisoners talk. Shouldn't they know who the worst of the worst are, the corrections officials who have oversight of these individuals?
Well, I'm not sure who you're talking about in terms of what the determinations are being. Clearly, classification and movement know what the crimes are because they decide where people go and how they're housed. So I'm not...
I'm told the guards aren't told what the crimes are of the inmates? I mean, they find out, of course, because inmates talk. Shouldn't they know who the worst of the worst are?
You know, I don't know that I would agree with that.
Okay, maybe I'm misinformed on that. The corrections officers have told me that they're not
Oh, no,
allowed.
I mean, that may be true that they're not told, but I think that the reason not to tell may be very valid in that especially vulnerable prisoners, people that are in for sex crimes, can be victimized in prison. So the need to know the crime is not necessarily important to the job. Your job is to, be there to keep peace in the prisons, and unless you're deciding on housing or placement or security status, I'm not sure that it would be a smart thing to publicize that information.
No, I'm not saying publicize it. I mean, the officials who have oversight. Thank you. I'm thinking that a part of what's going on with this inability to get the appropriate services for these types of individuals relates to a letter and some meetings I had about 2 weeks ago. I sent a letter to the governor after some meetings with mental health families and developmental disabled facilities, ARC in Schenectady and Bridge in Saratoga. And a part of what they tell me is, first of all, they can't retain and keep staffing, let alone the services. And a part of the reason why they can't retain and keep staffing and provide the services has to do with them leaving to actually take jobs, not only at state-run facilities, because some of these are private facilities, but at McDonald's, Burger King, Dunkin' Donuts. They realize that in 3 years they'll be getting $15 an hour. And we're not providing anywhere close to that amount of money for people who are caring for our most vulnerable in our society. And your son, as you represent him, is one of the most vulnerable in our society. Any budget that we do, even one coming up this year, should start with your son and those individuals who are suffering from what he's suffering from and the services that should be provided for him and those who are in the area of developmentally disabled. You might have known that 2 years ago the governor was going to cut $180 million out of the budget. We got it down to $90 million, and we were trying to get it down to no cuts in it. Well, eventually, one of our good assembly persons did a lot of lobbying. Assemblyman Weisenberg, was that?
Harvey Wiesenberg, yes.
Yeah, and we got the money back. But I can assure you that one of the things I'll be doing, and I know my colleagues on our side of the aisle, and I'm sure on the Assemblyman side of the aisle, will be making sure that there will be funding that's available for this type of treatment, because there's got to be an alternative for individuals who don't deserve to be in this type of setting. There are those who do need to be in that type of setting, but your son doesn't deserve to be in that. So we're going to try the best, I know on my part and several of our other parts, to make sure there is some funding for this staffing.